Before flying mounts were even really a thing, there was a Korean MMO published by a Japanese company. Yeah, you heard that right. That started all of it. Flyff, also known as Fly for Fun, was published by a Japanese company dubbed Gala Incorporated. Gala teamed up with a Korean developer in Aeonsoft and launched the game back in 2004. While the game would grow in server count, regions accessed and serviced, and more, eventually it reached a point where all of that just stopped. The forward momentum they had been building for over a decade started to just kind of fade away. By 2013, Fly for Fun was acquired by Webzen, before being published yet again by the previous company much more recently. Fly for Fun Universe would launch essentially an updated classic cross-platform version of the game, and take the majority of the remaining official population from the original Fly for Fun. While private servers still exist and the main game exists, it's largely subsided. And while it has a lengthy history and life cycle, it never quite reached the heights that some of its contemporaries like MapleStory and Ragnarok Online did. We will cover the largest contributing reasons for such, as we do, on the Death of a Game series, a series where we take the largest contributing factors for a certain game's failure or death and construct a timeline and gather evidence in a hope to solve the case. Without further delay, detectives, we have a case to solve. I would like to welcome a new sponsor to the channel, Fume. Fume helps people switch from a bad habit to a good habit. Fume is a diffusive device that allows you to breathe through the Fume device and enjoy various flavors. But switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that cannot be you. Fume just recently released some new cores on its website on June 30th. Orange Vanilla, which is sweet and citrusy with a touch of classic vanilla, Raspberry Lemon, which is a full-bodied lemonade with hints of berries, and Sparkling Grapefruit, which is fresh and cooling grapefruit. Not only are these new cores tasty, they're easy to install. Because the Fume features an adjustable airflow, which is great to fidget with, and it's also just easy to use. It even makes a nice clicking sound. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/nerdslayer or scan the QR code and use code nerdslayer to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code nerdslayer to save an additional 10% off of your order today. Now let's get to the mystery. The story begins in Shibuya, Tokyo, Japan, back in the early 90s. Gala Incorporated would be founded in 1993, with the purposes of essentially graphic design and homepage creation. Gala, the name, was dubbed after the creator's little gala gatherings he would throw with friends and acquaintances in Korea. Gala's immense exposure to the online and social scene early on gave them early exposure to video games and even free-to-play monetization schemes that they would then become familiar with. It took many years, but eventually Gala would start making video games of their own and allowing for free-to-play titles right away, which was still quite unheard of in the early 2000s, even in the East. Gala would contract a Korean developer by the name of Aeonsoft. Aeonsoft, a Korean developer founded in 2002 in Seoul, Korea, would be spearheading the development of the game. I find this interesting because it shows that Japanese companies had roots in online gaming, including the Korean market even just early on. This was the same time Phantasy Star Online, an iconic Japanese online RPG that I have already covered on the series, was reigning supreme after all. Aeonsoft would develop a prototype for their first game, dubbing it Clockworks Limited, as early as 2002. Clockworks Limited would have its name changed to Fly for Fun and enter closed beta quietly in Korea, September 2003. We can take a look at some of the screenshots from this beta and see that Fly for Fun already had its iconic style and look very early on, preferring to look a bit more chibi-like their competitors of the time MapleStory and Ragnarok Online. This would be controversial though, as it is still in those games, as certain players refuse to play chibi-styled characters. But considering it was targeting a younger, less intense demographic, and the game was very much a Korean one, it wasn't that surprising or unexpected. The original launch, the Korean launch, would take place in August of 2004. Within a month, Fly for Fun was able to win a couple of prestigious awards in Korea to signify their successful launch. Little details are actually known about the original Korean launch, other than Fly for Fun was a free-to-play title with a cash shop of varying types of items. Allowing for 3D play, Flyff for Fun was ahead of its time in many ways, and amongst its competition, it was the only true 3D title. Due to the success of the Korean servers, more servers would join Asia, with the addition of the Chinese, Taiwanese, and Thai servers in 2005. Before Flyff for Fun could make it to the West, Gala would open up Gala.net in Sunnyvale, California as a subsidiary and games publisher. The following year, Gala would open up a studio in Dublin, Ireland as well, which I was contacted by someone who actually worked at that specific branch, and they told me that it was a very enjoyable experience, well, up until it was terminated. Flyff for Fun was making a play at coming to the West, something that was not super common in the early 2000s, but was becoming more increasingly common as Asian developers realized that there was a market there to monetize. Nexon and NCSoft being the two biggest ones. The cultural differences between the Western and Eastern markets cannot be ignored though, and it affects not just the player bases and cultures, but the games themselves. If you've seen any of my other episodes covering Korean MMOs that were brought to the West, then you know that the two biggest culprits for why it doesn't work are regarding monetization and grinding. These can feed into each other, but I want to isolate them slightly for explanation. Something us detectives have to be able to do, right? With the monetization in Korean markets, there are major reasons for free-to-play being incredibly common. For starters, it was invented in the Asian markets to start with Japan creating gacha and popularizing arcades as precursors to all of this. Free-to-play was the norm, which utilized what you call a cash shop or a virtual shop where you could purchase different items, many of them containing actual values like pieces of armor, or in some cases weapons and even XP boosts. While these days people debate if these things are considered pay to win, back then, nobody was debating it. All of this was considered pay to win unless it was just a cosmetic costume. Because Nexon effectively hadn't brought free-to-play to the West yet, and then microtransactions, by consequence, Western fans weren't fans of this sort of arrangement yet, or at least weren't really aware of it. In some cases due to the aforementioned pay to win, right, not liking it, but really just because they weren't familiar with it. In Korea, it was literally illegal to sell black market goods. This is why virtual worlds in Western markets are essentially run by black markets, and I know this from personal experience. Korea's solution to this was also a money-making one, and a market control move, allowing companies to sell items directly themselves with heavy penalties for breaking the law. It's a profitable venture. It should be mentioned that in many Asian cultures also, that buying power or having money and basically being OP is actually just kind of like a culturally accepted thing. The second large difference in Asian titles was regarding the grind. Grinding in an RPG context is leveling your character up by essentially doing the repetitive tasks that you're given. Grind was far more common in early Western titles, but Asian titles consistently over the years have always featured very vertical focused power gaining structures that incentivize grinding even past the point of a normal level cap, like a prestige level. These Eastern games these days have made it to the West and excel at such models, but in 2005, the West was still new to such things. Flyff for Fun was ripe with grind. In fact, some would argue like Lineage or Ragnarok Online, other famous Korean titles, grinding as a group was kind of all you did in Flyff for Fun. There wasn't a whole lot of variety in the game style and approach otherwise. Though to be fair, this style is still very successful in today's titles like Black Desert Online. I mention that because people like to dismiss it sometimes, but the formula's still working. And Korean MMOs are far more common these days than Western MMOs. The US launch would take place in December 2005. Flyff for Fun would open with 8 different servers, which was quite impressive, or at least maybe an overestimation of what to expect. But it wasn't, because they didn't shut any of their servers down right away. While we can't pull up a ton of critical or even user reviews, or really any at all, for the time concerning the launch of Flyff for Fun, we can take a look at what review scores do exist, and the scores weren't half bad. But what was Flyff for Fun? Flyff for Fun was similar to Lineage in the sense that there were classes and subclasses. Character classes are chosen at level 15, with subclasses chosen at 60 and 130 respectively. Every level players get skill points that they can invest into their jobs or classes. At level 120, players can become a master, returning them to level 60 with enhanced powers, sort of like a prestige leveling thing. The primary method of gaining experience is through monster grinding or killing X and gathering X types of quests. There isn't really a story to speak of in Flyff for Fun. The combat is quite serviceable in Flyff for Fun, especially given in this modern world today. But where the unique aspects of Flyff for Fun came into play were concerning the PvP, the Lord system, and finally being the first MMO to popularly feature flying as a mechanic. While PvP started as primarily a dueling-focused thing in Flyff for Fun, Koreans enjoy PvP games, and with the similarities to the PvP juggernaut Lineage, eventually PvP worlds started to pop up, and literally were entire servers that were dedicated to PvP. These servers existed for long periods of time and had great amounts of success. The Lord system, which was introduced later on, would allow players who prestige level to qualify as a Lord candidate. While a Lord, players can introduce events on the server and be given player taxes. Very similar to Archlord, another Korean MMO that I covered. The final thing that's really quite impressive in the crowning achievement of Fly for Fun, that was before its time in Fly for Fun, was the flying. It's in the name, and at level 20 you had access to the game's distinctively unique flying system. At the time, no other MMO, especially popular MMOs, had flying yet. Flying was a huge part of Fly for Fun, just in terms of grinding to attain the better mounts and brooms, and the game being 3D also allowing you to fly for true verticality. Most famously, just years later, nearly every major MMO would start to feature flying and flying mounts in different forms, giving way to faster movement and yet a surprising lack of verticality in terms of what's actually being discovered and explored. That means that Fly for Fun wasn't just a pioneer, it's still one of the better flying MMOs out there, because they actually explored verticality as a serious form of gameplay, and not just traveling, something Ion would do later on as well. While they could have leveraged this more in Fly for Fun, being first doesn't always mean you have the correct path or even a clue of what that's supposed to be. Coming from a small Korean developer, Fly for Fun was nothing short of impressive. Their success in the US would result in European servers the following year, primarily in Germanic regions, however. The next year, multiple French servers would also be erected. This might be confusing to those that aren't aware of these two markets, but these are actually two very popular online RPG markets and quite insular when compared to other countries. Just look at France's Dofus, for example. It's one of the most popular online games of all time that unless you're European or you somehow found out about the game, you probably never heard of it. Fly for Fun would have a successful reign from 2006 to 2010, with various updates and patches during that time helping to improve the game. However, for the Western market by 2011, especially in America, things would dramatically slow down. So much so that Gpotato, the publisher, would sell to Webzen, reportedly following a 40% drop in revenue. Both the North American and European branches would be sold for a combined $17.5 million. Which, just goes to show how successful Fly for Fun really was. The Western market wasn't even their main market, and yet they were still able to sell their branches in those markets for multi-millions. It's no wonder from this point on that nearly all Korean titles would start to make similar journeys to the West. But now the future of Fly for Fun would be unsure. It's not that an acquisition automatically meant bad things, it just meant that things were going to change. And by 2012, Fly for Fun was unfortunately feeling and looking quite dated. And not just that, but it was lacking significant content pushes that would bring players back, or bring new players in, period. By 2013, Fly for Fun had reached 30 million accounts worldwide, which is an impressive number regardless of how much time each of these accounts are playing. In typical Korean MMO type playbook, or really just popular Asian IP playbook at this point, the Fly for Fun IP would receive an autoplay style mobile copycat RPG dubbed Fly for Fun Legacy. I mean, come on, just look at it and tell me that you can recognize it differently from any other mobile RPG. I can't. Server merges would happen for Fly for Fun for the first time in a serious fashion in 2019. Which is just incredibly impressive. That's almost 15 years after the game launched. This would make some of the European servers consolidated. While this wasn't the best of news, some servers still remained, and the game had already been in existence, like I said, for 15 years. All worlds must come to an end at some point, at least in an official capacity. Webzen, in a surprising turn of events, would offload the Fly for Fun IP altogether, transferring it back to the original creators of the project. I don't know how this legally worked, or what the deal was, or even just literally how it happened, but apparently according to the article there was a process to transfer it to a new publisher. I just didn't think that the new publisher would be the original one, which means that they found a way back into the picture after selling the shares and parts of their company originally in the Western markets for 15 million. Talk about good business. With the OG publisher back in control in 2021, not the best news would accompany such, as Gala would be running the game through another platform dubbed Way 2-Bit. The problem with this platform is that it was platforming and allowing for crypto events, which many fans felt was poor taste and a poor usage of an old legendary IP like Fly for Fun. After nearly 18 years plus of a life cycle, Fly for Fun was seemingly on the way out, as you would probably expect, right? And the original title was very much so, with virtually all servers shut down but 2 globally. But April 2022, news would come out concerning a new Fly for Fun title dubbed Fly for Fun Universe. Fly for Fun Universe was trying to be Fly for Fun's version of modern WoW going classic. Or think of other modernizations of classic online RPG titles. There were going to be some major differences though. For starters, Fly for Fun Universe would be cross-platform, and second, the game would also streamline and change many of the features of the game, which some fans, as you would imagine, were happy about, and others not so much. Finally, the game, though, was being updated and playable on browser, which felt like a great way of modernizing an old title and making it more accessible. Fly for Fun Universe would launch July 5th, 2022, and within the same month would hit 800,000 players. Fly for Fun Universe would change a couple of key mechanics. The upgrade and leveling systems would be changed, though not necessarily for the better, still allowing for tons of pay to win. That's not saying much though, since the original Fly for Fun was also pay to win and was already being milked for whatever was left, with no new content being implemented anyway. So this was a much better alternative. Fly for Fun Universe, despite being based on version 7 of Fly for Fun, also featured new things like new group content, streamlined the grouping features to just make it easier to do it earlier levels, and more. Really, in 2022 and now modern 2023 at the time of this video, there's little to no reason to play to bits original Fly for Fun, as it's not getting any new content and it's more pay to win with massive inflation. But Fly for Fun Universe is still very much a pay to win title, but at least allows players in a modern world the chance to play an iconic MMO. I can't be mad about it in the end. It's a much better fate than other titles like Dark Eden and Archlord got. If you don't feel like playing Universe and supporting the game's developers though, you can play the classic version on the private servers, such as Insanity Fly for Fun, that have been running for over 10 years without a wipe. Fly for Fun is a well-represented title with multiple avenues to play it, though not quite the same title it was when it made its mark on the world originally. This is the best story you can kind of hope for as an online RPG, for your favorite MMO or favorite virtual world, right? Where official servers are in existence, new servers exist for a newer title, and finally classic servers exist on the communal or private servers. All in all, this is quite a happy ending for a Death of a Game episode. Not that all of them are supposed to be dark or grim or even about a game or company's failure or them not being successful. Ultimately, time comes for all worlds, and sometimes the reasons for a game fading away aren't so crucial or even dramatic. The music's playing detectives, which means that we have obtained enough clues and bits of evidence to put this case to rest. It was a delight to cover a title that was part of my childhood and one of my friends' favorite games. But in case you weren't paying attention, what caused Fly for Fun to fade away? Or fail to reach the same height or success as MapleStory or Ragnarok Online, at least in terms of popular media and representation. The game had large amounts of pay to win. That's always a deterrent. Lack of content other than just grinding. Flying, the core feature, was never quite evolved. Newer, more updated version of the game exists. Time made Fly for Fun feel dated after 18 years. Fly for Fun is an overperforming yet at the same time little known Korean MMO in the big ocean of giant MMOs, and even the giant ocean of Korean MMOs specifically. I don't think I have ever quite seen it get the love or notoriety it should deserve, even just based on its most influential bits or the fact that it was really good business, right? I wanted to do an episode on it because of these reasons. To tell a little known story about a surprisingly successful Korean MMO. One that took an alliance from Japan and Korea to create the first flying mechanic we've ever seen in an online RPG. Thanks for watching, detectives.